All right, welcome to a little talk. Um, I'm here in the dark room at the University of Victoria, and I want to talk to you about a book, specifically Robert Adams' book, Sea Stories. This is a remarkable book. I've been thinking about it constantly for the last couple weeks, and I really wanted to talk to you about it. This video is really inspired by Alex South, and if you haven't seen some of the YouTube videos that he's been doing just discussing photo books, I would highly recommend checking it out. But I really am in love with this book by Robert Adams, Sea Stories. A lot of you might know Adams from his work in New Topographics and his book, The New West, back from the 70s when he collaborated with a lot of other artists. Specifically people like Stephen Shore. But this is, I believe, some of his newer work. This specific book was published by the Yale University Press, and it's all sort of more local to him and where he's living in, I believe, Astoria, Oregon currently. But yeah, it's really a masterclass in the movement of the frame and how I'm really amazed by that throughout this book. In the way that Adams leads the viewer through the book with his images. So of course, we're gonna go through this book, and I just want to discuss a lot about the images that we're seeing in this. So we have to start with the title, Sea Stories. So we have this little overview of the area that Adams is working in. It's in the back. It just says where this is. This is near Adams's home of Astoria, Oregon. It's not quite right next. I imagine it's about like a 30-minute drive or so, but it's a nice starting overview, a nice landscape, a nice very wide scene. There's like a town over here and then the beach. It's quite beautiful. Going in further, we have the book is set up in three parts. It's the journey of trees, the light of spring, and the path home. They're little sequences in themselves, but we're going to start off with the journey of trees. So we start off and we have just straight up, this chapter features some challenging images. They're not all compositionally perfect in my opinion, but I am also a nobody. But these are some just nice descriptive pictures of some trees, nice details. We can see there's some buds blossoming on these trees. And one thing to note is that this is really a cyclical commentary, I guess you could say, about the growth of trees, as the sequence is called The Journey of Trees. We can start to see there's these trees and they start to grow more and more. There's more leaves. The leaves get better as we progress through the seasons. They grow more. They're more vibrant. As you can see, they're just filling the frame now. Just overwhelming. Like, look at all these leaves that have just grown out of nowhere. So we're going to skip ahead through a lot of these pictures, but one thing to notice is that these branches, these kind of leaveless twigs, they're starting to feature more. And this kind of cycle of growth ends here, and we begin this cycle of decay where you get these, the leaves start to fall, you get these like really harsh branches, twigs, bushes, they're contorted, they're pretty gloomy. And you can see like the leaves are dying off, they're falling to the ground. So you look in the corners here, you can see there's some just leaves on the ground. And it's really, the pictures have changed a lot from these type of pictures where there's just leaves everywhere. They really changed to looking at the death of these trees. And then we have this full stop here. The page just ends. It's an end in the section a little bit. It's a full stop, I would call it. We're changing into this beach scene. As you can see, there's a log here and this nice water. And it's a bit of an intro to the beach, which we work with in later on in the book a lot. So we start to see this tree, and it's in the water. It's a piece of driftwood, very common in the Pacific Northwest, where this is taking place. And one thing I want to talk about is just how Adams leads us with this. We start off in this sequence with the tree in the water, and then gradually we're watching these pieces of wood drift ashore. And he's just leading us through this with these we've already discussed like the cycle of life and death with the death of the trees, and now we're watching it as these trees and these pieces of driftwood, they're being pushed up onto the land. And Adams just does an excellent job detailing this with his photos. And so as you can see, we're no longer really looking at the water, we're just looking at the wood on the beach, and then we're turning more to the grass in the beach. Continuing, looking at the grass, which we'll look at a lot later, and that's the end of that first part. So it's really, the first part is just all talking about these trees that grow and then they die and then they end up in the water and they're pushed up onto the beach. And it's just, that whole chapter is just a great example of Adams leading the viewer with his pictures, like where he's making us look. But we're going to move on to the next part. This is called The Light of Spring. And we start off with these interesting wave shots of these breaks. It's very chaotic. The waves are very messy, but it's very beautiful. And then we're back on the beach, and then we're looking at birds. And birds are going to play a big part later on in the book. It's a bit of an introduction, but one thing to note is that this is a dead bird. It's in the process of decomposition. And this is where something really interesting happens. Adams begins to, in my opinion, he's drawing parallels between the texture of the grass, this sweeping grass along the beach. You can see the corner of the ocean in the corner. But he's drawing comparisons between the texture of these patches of grass and then the dead feathers on the bird that's decomposed. So these are just really interesting comparisons. You can kind of see similar shapes occurring throughout the frame. It's just a really nice study of the texture. And now we're going to discuss a lot about birds, actually, quite a bit. So in a wave, again, cyclical manner, we're looking at birds. We have these birds here in the corner, and slowly throughout this sequence, in this part, they're going to grow in size and dissipate, kind of like a wave. So as you can see, we get more birds and more birds. And eventually we're just these masses of these big troops of birds. You're kind of crashing on the shore like a wave itself, which is just really interesting. So even more birds. They're just amassing. I'm going to speed up a little bit because it's just a lot of birds. Then we start to have this storm creep in. So as you can see, things are getting pretty ominous. And it's interesting, the birds still stick around, but there's less and less. We're still really just looking at the water and the waves and the sky and the birds on the sand. Some beautiful pictures in here, but it's very repetitive, but that doesn't mean it's bad. And then something that happens is that the birds, they start to leave. So as we can see, these geese just straight exiting, flying away, watching these birds trail away. It's interesting. And then we start to pull back from the birds. You can see they're smaller and smaller. They're getting less and less in each frame. And then we're just left with just one. And this picture right here on the right, I find quite beautiful. But then the birds, they're gone, and we're turning towards the land, which is what we're going to be looking at in the next part. And this is really the end of that second part. But Adams really does a good job in each sequence or each part. He references, in my opinion, he references the other parts throughout this book. We come to the final part, which is The Path Home. So we start looking at the beach again, familiar objects, and then we're being led. We're turning away from the beach, we're going inland, and we're being led into this space through the use of these paths. And you know, this Roberts, or Adams, I should say, he does a really good job throughout the whole book in drawing the viewer in and zooming in sequence. So we have this tree here with this nice path that Adams is walking along. And then in the next frame, we're looking at what I imagine is a close-up of some of these, the buds on these trees. Little bird up here, kind of referring to that last part where we looked at a lot of birds. So we're just going through the land, really, looking at all these. This is a beautiful image, just a nice little road in the woods, some paths. Introduction to, there's a denser forest, the light is struggling to come through. Then we have this sequence, which I love. Now, it's a very challenging sequence. The pictures themselves are not what a lot of people would enjoy. I personally like this pairing together. We have this little sun, and it's just casting a little bit of light onto the forest floor. There's not much information at all in this photograph. There's almost zero detail. It's just mostly this little beam of light. And then on this side, we're examining what's in that little bit of light. And this is what I'm talking about. Adams is drawing us and he's showing us what he's looking at and how he wants us to view it. It's really excellent. Then we continue, just some nice pictures of the forest. Once again, looking at details here, we're just zooming in on some leaves and plants and flowers. And then we have another full stop kind of end of that sequence. And we have these big green pastures that come about. Could be some sort of allegory for a greener future, a better tomorrow, but that could just be pushing it. But we do have just some nice pictures of just the fields. This is the last picture in the series, in the whole part, and in the book. Just a nice picture of some grass, maybe referring to some of the grass we looked at earlier. That's it really, though, for the whole book. In the back, talks about where some of the pictures were made in Western Oregon and Washington, about the first image, and then it breaks down the reasoning for the titles of the parts. Nothing incredible. But quite poetic in some parts. I'd recommend you to look at this book yourself if you can find it. It was, as I said, it was published by the Yale University Press. I don't know if Adams himself was responsible for the composition of this book, but whoever did it did a wonderful job. Yeah, that's all I have to say about Robert Adams's book, Sea Stories. Thank you for listening. I don't expect this video to get that many views, but if you watched it and you enjoy it, please let me know. I'd love to continue doing these. And thank you.